This video is an anatomy of what I believe to be a Black economic movement taking place. First, we will look at the current financial circumstances of Black America, then the what, how, and when to implement a solution. This is our dilemma. More than 1 in 4 Black Americans live in poverty. The Black unemployment rate is typically double that of whites. Racial gaps in household income persist. The income gap is held fairly steady for the past 40 years. The home ownership rates for Blacks is just 43% compared to 72% for whites. Whites have significantly higher levels of wealth than Blacks. Earning a college degree hasn't protected us from falling behind.
Dig deep into America's $17 trillion economy, and you'll find fractures beneath the surface. The spoils are split unevenly between men and women, old and young, high school dropouts, and MBAs. But one of the most divisive disparities is only skin deep. This is the economy in black and white. Everything you own, houses, stocks, cars, that's your wealth. In 2011, the wealth of the median white household was over $110,000. African Americans on average, 17 times less, just over $6,000. And housing has a lot to do with it. For the average American, their home is the most valuable part of their portfolio. It's an investment that can appreciate with time, and it can be passed from one generation to the next. But the rate of homeownership among whites is 28% higher than that of Blacks, and the lingering effects of segregation could be to blame. Discriminatory practices by the Federal Housing Administration prevented African Americans from buying houses in many suburban neighborhoods. The Fair Housing Act of 1968 sought to level the playing field. But by then, African Americans were entering a housing market that had already seen massive appreciation. Meanwhile, white families had seen their housing investment soar in value during their head start. Fast forward to the 21st century, minority groups were again victims of housing exploitation, this time by big banks. Bank of America and Wells Fargo, among others, were compelled to pay hundreds of millions of dollars in fines and restitution for pushing minorities into exploitative subprime mortgages and charging them higher rates and fees. This contributed to the fact that Blacks and Hispanics lost nearly a quarter of their wealth between 2004 and 2010. Whites lost just 1% during that same period. So the American economy houses two realities, one Black, one white. The divide between them, a measure of inequality.
With higher poverty and unemployment rates, an historically consistent income gap, and a growing wealth gap, many Blacks are skeptical that the country will eventually make the changes necessary for racial equality.
The United States is often called the Great Melting Pot, but it's a country that's struggled with race relations throughout its history, and still does today. A 2015 CNN and Kaiser Family Foundation poll found about half of Americans think racism is a big problem, one that doesn't seem to be getting better. 2/3 said racial tensions in the United States had increased over the last decade. More than half of Blacks said they had experienced some form of racial discrimination in their lifetimes, from being denied a job to fearing for their lives. About 1/3 of whites and Hispanics reported similar experiences. Blacks and Hispanics were also far more likely than whites to say that they had been unfairly treated in the last month in a public place, such as a restaurant or in a store, because of their race. Segregation is still a reality as well, at work and at home. 60% of whites said their work colleagues were all or mostly white, and close to 70% of whites said either their social circle or their neighborhood was mostly white. When asked if certain factors, like discrimination, a lack of educational opportunities, and broken families, played a major role in the social and economic problems facing their communities, the majority of Blacks and Hispanics said yes. But even so, there is optimism. A majority of Blacks and Hispanics aged 18 to 34 say it's easier for them to achieve the American dream than it was for their parents. Only 31% of young white adults said the same.
Despite all of this, most Blacks are optimistic about the future, which leads us to a solution. This is a timeline from the year 1600 to the year 2017. The first slaves were brought to this country in 1619, and slavery was not abolished until 1864. Another 100 years saw legalized segregation until the civil rights movements of the 1960s. There's no wonder that we find ourselves in the financial dilemma that we are in today. Martin Delany was an abolitionist, journalist, physician, and writer. He was a graduate of Harvard Medical School and served in the Civil War. He also worked alongside Frederick Douglass to publish the North Star. He believed that black liberation depended upon entrepreneurial success. Booker T. Washington believed that African Americans should concentrate all of their energies on industrial education and the accumulation of wealth. He founded the National Negro Business League, whose mission was to promote the commercial and financial development of the Negro. The organization grew rapidly with over 600 chapters in 34 states by 1915. Annie Malone was a businesswoman, inventor, philanthropist, and known for the development of the mail order process for beauty care products. Through her Poro College, she employed nearly 200 people in St. Louis, and by the 1920s, she had become a multimillionaire. She ensured that her employees, all African American, were paid well and given opportunities for advancement. Sarah Breedlove, better known as Madam C.J. Walker, was an African American entrepreneur, philanthropist, and political and social activist. She was eulogized as the first female self-made millionaire in America. Walker showed other black women how to budget, build their own businesses, and encouraged them to become financially independent. Marcus Garvey was unique in advancing a pan-African philosophy to inspire a global mass movement and economic empowerment focusing on Africa, known as Garveyism. Vernon Johns was an American minister and pioneer in the civil rights movement. His highly controversial and outspoken sermons on race relations and economics were ahead of his time. He was the pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church from 1947 to 52 and was succeeded by Martin Luther King Jr. A movie was later made about his life, starring James Earl Jones.
Now, we're not going back to that restaurant, are we?
No. Brother Hill, what do you see?
I see a grocery store. What do you see?
I see a whole mess of Negro dollars going into white pockets. Now look at that. They'll take our money, but they despise us so much, they will not touch our hands in the exchange. Money is power, Brother Hill.
You ain't lying.
Then why are we turning over our power to people who despise us?
But Dr. Johns, the members of our congregation are professional people. They're not business-oriented.
Yeah, and that's our biggest mistake. Right now, we are only consumers. If we're only consumers, we're parasites. Do you want a definition of perpetual motion? Give the average Negro a Cadillac and tell him to park it on some land that he owns. If gold was discovered in the hottest regions of hell, the whites would be there within a fortnight, mining it for all its wealth. The coloreds would show up 3 weeks later, offering their services as maids and butlers. The thing to do is to get there first, but we don't think that way. Just to show you what can be done on a small parcel of land, I grew these at the parsonage. I left the roots and the tops on to prove they are not store-bought. The Bible tells us that a feast is made for laughter, and wine maketh merry, but money answereth all things. Now, what does that mean? It means that whoever controls the money has all the answers. You get control of the money by producing. Negroes need to own more businesses, and Negroes need to patronize those businesses. By the way, I noticed that some of you were staring at my feet this morning because I had neglected to wear shoestrings. Well, I'll start wearing them when Negro folks start producing them.
Dr. George Fraser of FraserNet and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan of the Nation of Islam say it best.
I've been to South Africa, East Africa, West Africa, North Africa, all over the Caribbean, and all over this country, speaking 120 times a year for the past 20 years. And I can tell you that there are no black people in the entire world doing better than we are. In fact, if the truth be known, we are the beacon of hope for every single person of African descent in the entire world. We need a third and final moral imperative and moral assignment. I said third. The first two, in case you forgot, was freedom, a 250-year fight for freedom, where 10 generations of our ancestors fought and died for our freedom. They chartered a good and righteous course, stayed that course, and we were freed in 1864, and we don't have to spend 1 minute of our lives fighting for our freedom. That was the first moral imperative and moral assignment from my perspective. The second was civil rights, voting rights, and public access from 1864 to 1964, 4 generations, 100 years. So we were unified around those ideas, if you will. We've learned that in a market-based economy, in a democratic capitalistic society, the only color that really matters is green. So the next movement must be, the next unifying purpose must be economic development, wealth creation, the closing of the income and wealth gap. And to do that, we must more wisely manage the $753 billion annual economy. And two, we must become an entrepreneurial culture. We must create work and jobs for our people, because that is the only way to raise up the poor. That's what we must do. And we must do that by using networking, strategic alliances, joint ventures, partnerships as our infrastructure to build the kind of partnerships, the kind of love, the collaboration, collectiveness that is necessary. Finally, let me say this real plain, so just so you don't get this confused. God ain't giving us anything else. We have freedom, civil rights, voting rights, and public access, a $723 billion annual economy, $5 trillion of intellectual capital, 9 million of us are doing okay. We ain't getting nothing else. So until we learn how to come together, work with and through each other, because that's the final thing God wants us to learn, until we learn how to connect the dots, leverage our collective resources and intellectual capital, when we learn that, we will be a force to be reckoned with, and don't you believe for 1 minute that others do not understand that.
We are now in 2010. And what is the cry? Jobs and justice. Well, wait a minute. How long are you going to sit around begging white people to do for us what we have the power to do for ourselves?
It's pretty clear that the solution to our dilemma is capitalism. We must become entrepreneurs. So how do we do it? S.B. Fuller was an American entrepreneur and the first African-American male millionaire. He started with $25 and created 9 corporations grossing over $18 million a year. Along the way, he also mentored many others, such as John H. Johnson of Johnson Publishing, George Johnson, founder of Johnson Products, and Dr. Joel Dudley Sr. of Dudley Q Products. Joe Dudley started with only $10 and created multiple corporations grossing over $35 million a year. He also promised S.B. Fuller to continue to help anyone that wanted to become a successful entrepreneur. Fuller and Dudley philosophies of self-help and door-to-door sales are proven entrepreneurial methods that anyone can use to become successful. Now that we know what needs to be done, and we have examples of how to do it, let's look at previous events in history to tell us when.
We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
TV and radio made it possible for events of the civil rights movement to be seen and heard quickly around the world. The advent of the internet made it possible for Barack Obama to raise the money to become President of the United States.
It was whispered by slaves and abolitionists as they blazed a trail towards freedom through the darkest of nights. Yes, we can. It was sung by immigrants as they struck out from distant shores and pioneers who pushed westward against an unforgiving wilderness. Yes, we can. It was the call of workers who organized, women who reached for the ballot, a president who chose the moon as our new frontier, and a king who took us to the mountaintop and pointed the way to the promised land. Yes, we can to justice and equality.
I'm willing to work hard. It doesn't matter who you are, or where you come from, or what you look like, or where you love. It doesn't matter whether you're black or white, or Hispanic or Asian, or Native American, or young or old, or rich or poor, able, disabled, gay or straight. You can make it here in America if you're willing to try. I believe we can seize this future together because we are not as divided as our politics suggests. We're not as cynical as the pundits believe. We are greater than the sum of our individual ambitions, and we remain more than a collection of red states and blue states. We are and forever will be the United States of America. And together, with your help and God's grace, we will continue our journey forward and remind the world just why it is that we live in the greatest nation on earth. Thank you, America. God bless you.
Considering the parts that technology played in the civil rights movement and the election of Barack Obama, it's no surprise that there were a lot of advancements in communication leading up to the Civil War. One indication that an economic movement is taking place is that thousands of people are opening new accounts in black-owned banks. Another indication is that economic empowerment symposiums are being conducted to promote entrepreneurship. The numbers of websites promoting Buy Black has exploded in recent years. The explosive growth of the internet has made this phenomenon global. Advancements in technology have enhanced communication like never before. A message of capitalism with proven methods of success and enhanced communication like never before are the foundations of a black economic movement. In short, collaboration plus coordination and communication equals power. And it's all happening now.
I'm here to talk to all of you that are shaking in your boots. What are we gonna do? That crazy man, he's the president and he don't like black people. He don't like Mexicans. He don't like Muslims. Maybe so. Who cares? We don't give a damn what he likes or what he don't like. The future is not his. The future is ours.